blew my wife's mind opening that clamshell and showing her this tiny little SD card. Welcome to Recotopia, a happy home for recommended movies, shows, and music from two people you can definitely trust. Trustability varies by region, no guarantees implied. And now, here are your hosts, Aaron Dicer and Jeremy Scott.
We could go and see Mr. Lincoln, or we could watch on television Big Mama's House. It's about a little black man pretending to be a fat black lady. They've just showed some of it on the television, and they're all chasing after him. It looked hilarious, Martin.
Hello, everybody. Look at that fidget spinner Aaron is holding up that you can't see if you're listening only. This is Recotopia episode 78, and I am Jeremy Scott.
And I'm Aaron Dicer.
Today's big recommend is Philomena. I'd like to give a shout out to the chat for coming in every week and watching us while we talk about movies and adding to the discussion and the discourse. You can do the same on Twitch or YouTube Live. Before we get into the big recommend, we like to start with some small wee recommends. Aaron, do you have any small recommends this week?
It's no big deal.
Itty bitty living space.
It's so small and light.
It's small, it's tiny, it's petite, it's wee.
Sure. Let's start on the TV side of things this week. The show How To with John Wilson is back on Max, formerly known as HBO Max. This, I believe, is the final season of this show. John Wilson is somebody who lives in New York City, would take his camera around the city and just document for all of us what an alien world New York City actually is. Like how different, like just what the city breathes and how it, exists. And what he does is he takes all this footage that he shoots and creates these how-to segments. Now, the how-tos very rarely relate completely to where it ends up going. It's basically a starting point for a journey of thought, and visual stimuli. He has a very dry delivery, a very dry sense of humor. He will often use video of things to represent other things, so like visual metaphors, that kind of thing, which I think is funny. But overall, it's just, there's nothing like this on TV. It is a one-of-a-kind kind of show where a guy just puts his camera out there and just finds weird things to talk about. Now, I will say, be prepared. He's willing to go places you will be shocked that he goes. So let's say bodily functions. Let's say body modifications will appear or whatever. This isn't like the heart of the show. I'm just giving you a warning that he's not afraid to point his camera anywhere. In fact, the very first episode of this new season is how to find a bathroom in New York City, is the how-to. And there's lots of really gross bathrooms in New York City, and he's not afraid to show you exactly how gross they are. Okay. So that kind of thing. Anyways, it's interesting, it's fascinating, and it's unique. And I really, really enjoy it. But I think this is the last season. There's a couple other seasons. The episodes are really short. The seasons are pretty short. Real quick binge if you wanted to catch up on it, or even just watch one and kind of see what it's about. So, How To with John Wilson.
I'm not gonna start with that New York bathroom one. I'll tell you that much. But having been to New York twice, I've seen some gross bathrooms. And I get it. All right, How To with John Wilson. Where is that?
That's on Max.
Max, formerly HBO Max. That's what you said.
Correct.
I remember that. Okay, everybody, my recommends this week. My small ones are not movies. And my first one's going to be a video game for the Nintendo Switch that came out in July called Disney's Illusion Island. And I want to start out by telling you this game is for kids. Okay? I don't need anybody commenting. Jeremy enjoys a game that my 6-year-old enjoys. But that is exactly what happened. I saw a good review. It has really good reviews online at all the major game review places. And it's kind of a original Mario side-scrolling jumping kind of game, but with Mickey, Minnie, Donald, and Goofy. And it doesn't have cutscenes, so it has when they have dialogue, it zooms in on them, and then there's little text bubbles that show up, and you can control how fast they go through that. And it's a very simple game. We're only maybe a third of the way through it. My wife and I played for a couple hours on Sunday, and we just had a blast. It's very vivid, colorful, and just fun to play. You gradually, every 10 minutes, you gain a new skill. And you start revisiting boards you've been on, but now you have new ways to get around them and get to places you couldn't before. So yeah, it's a game for kids with Disney people in it, and it's a kind of a side-scrolly, jumpy Mario type game. And really enjoyed it. So there you go. That's my first small recommend for the day. Buy that wherever you buy your video games. Blew my wife's mind opening that clamshell and showing her this tiny little SD card.
Yeah, I'm interested in this. This is the kind of game I enjoy. I like the pretty colors. I like the simple side-scrolly kind of things. I've famously lost interest in the Zelda games when they became open world. Like, I don't want to have to cook stuff to get to the dungeons. I don't understand what we're doing anymore. So Old Man Yells at Cloud. I will play Illusion Island. My favorite game right now is Pikmin 4, which just came out.
I saw you said something about that on Twitter, I think, or maybe.
Yeah, it came out the same weekend as Barbie and Oppenheimer. So, I was trying to get it in on the Barbenheimer thing. The Barbenheimer, maybe. Barbenheimerman. No, that probably doesn't.
So what is that game? I Googled it at the time, and it looked like sensory overload, so I moved on.
So what's really interesting about Pikmin is the game is based on a day period on this planet that you go to, and these little creatures that you can pick out of the ground. Some are red, some are blue, some are yellow. The red ones don't get hurt by fire. The blue ones don't get hurt by water. The yellow ones don't get hurt by electricity, that kind of thing. And then you use these creatures to accomplish the tasks you need to get the parts for your ship or the fruit to make your fruit drinks or, whatever. And so there's a real itch it scratches in my brain of organization and putting, getting tasks done in an efficient way and that kind of stuff.
Do you play PC games at all?
Here and there, sure, yeah.
I feel like Civilization games would be right up your alley.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with Civilization games and those if I understand them correctly, is there's a real waiting there's a real time process to them where things build up over time or whatever. And I'm looking to accomplish short-term goals, not build a long-term kind of thing. Well, if you
break down all of Civilization as it exists into a lot of tiny short-term goals, that's a good way to view that game, because you start out with one city and one worker and one warrior, and you can have the worker do a variety of things. He could build a road, he could build a structure, he could and the warrior can fight or stand guard. And you can also determine how fast. Here I am trying to plug Civilization 5.
That's all right. It's just become video game hour here.
Yeah, sorry
very,
about
very
that.
quickly.
Do you have a second small recommend this week?
I do. I saw a movie from 1979 called Injustice for All. This is a Pacino film. He plays a lawyer. There have been many stories that have told the story of defense lawyers and the problem, the ethical issues that defense lawyers come into when it's I know I'm defending a guilty person, but my job is to be their defense. My job is to defend them, even if it seems like they're guilty. This is how the system works. This is my role in the system. This is the ultimate version of that movie. And Al Pacino is that lawyer who is struggling with what his job is. There is a corrupt judge that gets accused of a horrible crime, and that judge asks him to be his defense lawyer. He agrees and then immediately starts regretting it. And it's about his journey in defending this corrupt judge played by John Forsythe. Christine Lottie is in there as well. Jeffrey Tambor steps in a really interesting role. And it's that old school kind of movie where you have all these different characters that are just operating around the central plot. It seems like anymore with movies, every single character gets their setup, payoff, resolution. Like if you're in the movie, you have to have a character arc that resolves for the audience. And it didn't used to be that way. Like your central protagonist would have that, but then you would just have other people who were just around them in their lives, and you may not know how that resolved or what that thing. And this has a lot of that, which I kind of find refreshing to go back to old movies in that way sometimes. It's just like they feel more like authentically placed in someone's life. But Tambor and there's another judge played by Jack Warden have their own stories that don't necessarily resolve, but they're interesting and they have you thinking about things. I love the way this movie ends. I don't want to spoil it. I know it's, 44 years old now, so it's not like you haven't had the chance to see it, but a lot of people haven't seen it. I think it's one of Pacino's lesser seen movies. So yeah, it's a small recommend for me. Check out And Justice for All. You will need to rent it. I don't think it's streaming anywhere for free. Unless I missed somewhere. So, throw down like $2.99 on
You're
Amazon
on a
and check it
Pacino
out.
kick lately, aren't you?
I've seen a few. Yeah, I've seen a few of his lately. Also, one of your favorite movies, Devil's Advocate. Saw that,
I thought that you'd seen that one. I got a question over here in the comments asking if your movie here is the one where the judge pulls out and fires a gun instead of using his gavel.
Yes. That's the Jack Warden character.
That's amazing.
It's that character is really interesting because the movie indicates that judge is so fed up with his work and what he has to do that he's suicidal, but it never really it doesn't like a modern movie I think would have him commit suicide, would have like that in the movie. And I guess maybe that's spoiler that he doesn't, but this movie just plays around him as if like, no, he's just in a terrible place. And the movie, allows him to be in that terrible place. So anyways, it's good stuff.
All right. Been a long time since I've had a food or drink recommend. And I and my wife recently tried a brand new food from South America that we had never had before, called pupusas. And these are from El Salvador and Honduras. Both countries claim to be the birthplace.
That's always fun.
It's like the Philadelphia cheesesteak. There's like two places that claim to be the originator. It is I'm going to read from Wikipedia because I had no experience with this food before we just decided to go try it. It's a thick griddle cake or flatbread made with cornmeal or rice flour, similar to Colombian and Venezuelan arepas. And then it's usually stuffed with fish or meat or cheese or squash or beans. I had one with cheese and beans, one with cheese and beans and steak. The structure is like a quesadilla that instead of like one tortilla being folded over, it's two round things and you put something inside before you griddle them. This was effing delicious. We've already made an appointment, not an appointment, we put on a calendar. We're going to go back here this week. It's so good. It was unlike anything I've ever had. I was expecting it to be very similar to pita bread or tortilla, and it's not. It's got its own real earthy, awesome flavor. And if you have a place near you that does authentic pupusas, I would highly suggest you give it a try because I was blown away. So there you go.
Very nice.
It sounds like a dirty word, but I want it. Yeah, well, there you go. It does sound like a dirty word. And yes, according to my El Salvadoran coworker, it's definitely El Salvadorian. So yeah, I think it's time for this week's big recommend.
I'm fine. It's just that you're so big.
It's so huge.
It's a good rule, but this is bigger than rules.
It's bigger on the inside.
Is it? I noticed.
Which is Philomena, brought to you by my co-host, Aaron Dicer.
Yeah.
Why don't you kick us off?
It has been 10 years since I've seen this movie and wanted to revisit it. I remember loving it, and after watching it again, confirmed. I love this movie, absolutely and wholeheartedly. It is based on a true story. There's a woman named Philomena from Ireland and a reporter named Martin Sixstreet from the BBC, formerly from the BBC. And they had this true story of a journey. And the journey basically follows Martin Sixsmith, who's played by Steve Coogan. He's down after being fired and having to listen to 3 minutes of newsposition summing up how he screwed up. Meanwhile, Philomena, Dame Judi Dench, lights a candle at her local cathedral and falls into a bad case of flashbacks. What I like about this movie is how quickly we get set up. One of the things I like about it is how quickly it sets up our characters and what they're going through. We see in a flashback that Philomena has a night of sex with boys she meets at a carnival.
A night of sex. I think it was probably just a few minutes, Aaron.
Yes, it might have been. It might have been. We do know from the movie that she did take her knickers down.
Yes.
They make that very, very clear. In conversation, I should say. We find out that that basically the older Philomena is now sad because this would be the 50th birthday of the son that she had based on this one encounter. And because she was a young girl pregnant in the 50s, she was sent to this place for unwed mothers, which was a convent in Ireland. And they were terrible, terrible human beings who basically manipulated and abused these young women to both have them work for them and sell their children into adoption for £1,000 a child. Which was quite a bit in that day. So she hasn't really known her son since he was maybe 2 years old, somewhere in that range. And she saw him get taken away by a family at that time. So we quickly see in this movie that Philomena's goal is to find her son, and Martin's goal is to write an expose. That's basically, they are at crossed purposes, right? She's not out to get anybody. She just wants to find her son and know that he's okay. Martin is, of course, seeing the injustice in all of this, and in the piece that he's going to write about this, I'm not sure I mentioned he's going to be a journalist in this regard. Wants this piece to be juicy and really take down the church and the convent for all that they've done. They go to the convent. The records have been, quote unquote, lost. They were lost in a fire, which we find out later was a bonfire that they threw the records in. There's a really great moment where the Martin character goes, how strange that it is in God's wisdom that the fire only took all the records out, but left the one record that proves that you are not allowed to see, your son or whatever. So anyhow, they're no help, but they find out that the son went to America with this couple. So Martin then gets his editor to pay for a trip to America. They go to America and they find out that Michael Hess is the name of her son then, but he died 8 years ago. He died in 1995 at a young age from AIDS. They find out he was a gay man. There's a very interesting way that this movie handles Philomena's understanding of homosexuality, which I found refreshing and interesting. We are led to believe, especially right when she finds out that information, that she's almost in denial about it. But we very quickly find out that she's not in denial. She's just, doesn't care. Like it doesn't matter to her.
Does not faze her at all.
It doesn't faze her at all. So they find out that he was high in the Republican Party, that he worked counsel for both the Bush and Reagan eras, but because the Republican family values famously against homosexuality and those things, that he was closeted for the most part. They find the sister. She's not really a ton of help, but does give some more insight into their background and their growing up and their parents. They eventually find his lover, his former lover and partner, and have a good conversation with him that reveals the final piece of information, which is that he was very interested in finding her. He too took a trip to Ireland to go to this place he was raised, and they told him that she didn't want anything to do with him and that they didn't have any way to contact her after she had, gone there and they hadn't said anything to her about that. So it's clear they're trying to hide something. And she finds out that he actually wanted to be buried in Ireland. This is how much he wanted to know where he came from. That, of course, moves her. And in the final moments, we get the confrontation at this convent. Martin really starts laying into Sister Hildegard, who is kind of our primary, I mean, villain's a weird word in a movie like this, but definitely the antagonist of the movie. And rightfully, righteously, justicely telling her things that are true, when Philomena has this moment where she says, but that's not what it's about for me. This is my story, not your story. And they have a really interesting conversation about forgiveness and anger. And she says something along the lines, when he says, I'm angry, she says, well, that must be exhausting. And it's kind of the heart of this movie. And we realize by the end on this journey, yes, our hearts are broken for Philomena, and knowing that she never got to meet this son, and that there were people keeping her from meeting the son, but that life continues to have moved on, and there's this new relationship with her and Martin as she tells him about a book that she's read. So yeah, the movie kind of leaves you with one of those interesting little conundrums, like, who do you identify with more here? Do you identify with Martin's point of view on this and his instincts on this? Do you agree with Philomena's instincts on this? And I think there's some beautiful things to think about in the areas of justice and forgiveness and all those kind of things.
Can I answer both?
You can, absolutely. I was just going to go to you, Jeremy. Jeremy, what did you think of Philomena?
I really enjoyed this film. This is the first time I have seen it, and I should no longer be able to be surprised by how good Judi Dench is, but
she's so good. Oscar nominated for this role.
She's deserved it. She's phenomenal in so many subtle little moments. Really, really, really loved the film, and especially her performance. I wrote down a lot of quotes that I'll share later, but one drawback I found was that I wish that we had gotten a little bit more of her daughter's experience through this. And I do appreciate that the daughter goes from not knowing she had a brother to being 100% supportive, to the point of even backing off when Philomena doesn't want her around. But I feel like that would have to be a very unique emotional experience. And perhaps they shot it and cut it, but obviously, even as she says at the end, this is Philomena's story. And it's kind of Martin's story, but it's Philomena's story. It's not her daughter's story. It's not the nun's story. And yeah, somebody has to take Martin's role and take these people to task for what they've done. I think Philomena is able to, she literally says, I forgive you, Sister Hildegard. I think she's able to do that because she's been carrying this pain for 50 years and she wants to let go. And the most powerful message the movie has, in my opinion, is about anger. And it took me 30 some years in my own life to learn how much control I have over extended anger. There's always going to be stuff that happens in life that's going to flash my ire, but how I respond to that, how long I choose to carry that, people carry anger for decades, and it is exhausting, but it's also killing them. Like, we don't give enough respect to what our brain can do to our bodies, and carrying this weight for 50 years. Yeah, it makes perfect sense that she doesn't have any room for anger anymore. And Martin's anger is probably a little bit displaced. He's got other things in his life to be angry about, probably himself for getting himself into the hot water that kicks it all off. Yeah, the first scene where she's telling him about a book, and he's just steadily getting wide-eyed and like, what am I living through right now, is
but
delightful.
We all know that person though, right? Like that older person who just wants to tell us about this thing and doesn't realize we don't care. Because they just want to have that moment with, like, it's beautiful. I think Steve Coogan is pretty incredible in this too.
He is.
I think he sells the authenticity of their relationship and
what's
what
great
they're
is
doing.
that I know him as a comedian, and he's incredibly funny, but here the humor is very subtle, and he feels like an actual human being. Of course, they're both playing people who were actual human beings. The fact that this is a true story, I think, makes it a lot harder to watch. And I read that after the movie came out, that they found out this was pretty widespread in Ireland.
It happened a
And there
lot.
were all these people that came out and said, this happened to me too. This happened to me too.
The movie at the end says thousands, I think. Thousands
Yeah.
still are looking for their parents and children.
Just wild that humans are capable of that kind of behavior.
Well, understand where it comes from is a misplaced dogmatism, right?
Yes.
Where it comes
Yes.
from is because we even hear it from Hildegard up to the very end. There is
Yes.
no change from Hildegard.
No.
Hildegard up
She
to the
deserved
very
it
end.
all because of her sin. It was
She
all a
sinned.
consequence of her
She
sin.
deserves it all. That's the dogmatism. That's where it comes. So Hildegard doesn't see it as being awful to somebody or hurting someone. She sees it as standing up for justice, standing up for righteousness. That's the ugly part for me, is just how misplaced we can be as humans about our own. And there's an interesting mirror there for Martin, who has his own kind of dogmatism in his anger, in him wanting these people to suffer, wanting them, to hurt. And Philomena walks in with forgiveness. And, there's this interesting thing as human beings of, how, what do we choose? Do we choose do we choose how we see the world to put it on other people and make them see it the way we see it? Or do we choose to live our lives believing what we believe and to love people around us no matter what?
One of the
believe?
dialogue lines I wrote down speaks to that, where he says to her, or she says to him, "Do you believe in God?" And he says, "I've always thought that was sort of a difficult thing to answer in any kind of a simple way. Do you?" And she goes, "Yes." And it's just a perfect encapsulation of their person.
So good.
Who they are. I also wrote down early on, Martin goes to his doctor. Doctor says, "Try running." He says, "I'm thinking about writing a book." He says, "About what?" He says, "Russian history." The doctor goes, "Try running." And even Martin seems to feel throughout the movie that the Russian history book is just a dead end, that no one's going to, he even says at one point, no one wants to read about Russian history.
You can tell Steve Coogan wrote on this script, because there's some really funny stuff here.
Yeah.
Even right from the beginning, the doctor says, "Stool sample outstanding," and he says, "Excellent," and he goes, "No, I mean, you haven't provided one." That's such a good joke. That's just a great joke, and there's a lot throughout. So,
She says, "And after the sex was over, I thought anything that feels so lovely must be wrong." And he goes, "Fucking Catholics." And then there's this line where he's calling his magazine editor, and he's telling her, "Can't keep doing this." And he says, "She's in bits. It's like she's lost him all over again." And she says instantly, "That's great. Write that down."
Yeah.
Because she doesn't care. This woman is not a human being.
But
to
that's
her.
a mirror to the things he said at the beginning, right? Like, he was the one saying, like, he would correct him himself. He'd be like, "That's good. I mean, for the story." Like, he was doing that exact thing early on.
Yep.
And so that's the holding the mirror up, to him kind of thing.
I
when
was
she
a
does
little
it.
frustrated. The movie lets him off the hook when she says, "Don't fly her home. You keep her there somehow." And he is like, "Oh, I'm going to have to keep her here somehow." And she just instantly says, "I think I want to stay for a couple of days." And
Yeah.
I think that's intentional. I think I would have preferred to see him have to struggle with that a little bit more instead of being bailed out by Philomena. But again, it's Philomena's story. It's her journey. It's not his, even though it is his. That's what I love. Philomena is on one end. That nasty nun is on the other end, or the magazine lady could be on the other end. And Martin goes from one end to the other through the course of the movie. He's the most changed by the events of the film.
Yeah. Yeah. There's one of the most, again, there are all these examples that just sum up their relationship. The first time they meet and they're around the table, He makes a joke about the Wizard of Oz. And then her daughter says, "Oh no, he was joking, Mom." Then he says something serious about his mom having arthritis in both knees, and she just laughs and laughs because she thinks she's doing a kindness. She thinks she's laughing at a joke she didn't get. It's so good. Also, her salad was more crouton than salad. I thought that was a nice little.
That is the only way to salad. I am a crouton fiend. My wife hates them, so I always get double croutons if we both get salad.
Yeah. There is also this moment where the scene directly goes from him saying human interest stories are for weak-minded, ignorant people, cut to him on the bed turning to his wife going, do you think I should do a human interest story?
Oh man, it was so fun.
Yeah.
And then sad.
Yes, that definitely as well.
All right. Any other elements of the film you want to touch on before we dive into the?
Should we talk about Big Mama's house? And how funny a movie that sounds.
The way she described it made me want to watch it, and I've seen it. Built that movie, and it's awful. But
she says
they made like a sequel to that. I'm pretty sure.
I think they did. Yeah, she says it's about a small black man pretending to be a big black woman, and they're all chasing him. It looks hilarious, Martin.
Yeah, she's just a lovely personality to spend time with. Even in the midst of all that historic pain, she still finds time to be delightful.
The one thing I will mention, aside from just the parts of the movie I love, and I briefly touched on this, the information, the plot movement, the story movement of this movie isn't used as a weapon against the audience. It's used as a foundation for us to stand on. And in the era of twist endings and story twists, many movies take their information and hide it from the audience until they can bludgeon them with it, till they can, make it this big thing or whatever. And this movie just naturally reveals the story as it happens. It doesn't, the information about him actually going home or whatever might be the biggest thing you could call like a story twist or whatever, but it happens at exactly the right time in the movie. It just feels like that's when we need to know that. That's when we need to feel that. I'm really impressed with this movie's ability to reveal its information to the audience. Does it really well.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's dive into the super secret double feature because I had a devil of a time here.
Be very, very quiet.
Secret? What secret?
Our dirty little secret.
I tell you something I've never told anyone.
I very strongly wanted to make a Catholic Church condemnation connection.
Sure.
So my first thought was Spotlight. There's also a movie with Melissa Leo about a young nun called Novitiate that even deals with how a young nun deals with sexual feelings. But again, this movie is not, its first priority is not to bash the Catholic Church. Its first priority is Philomena. So I ended up going with Lion, a 2016 film starring Dev Patel. It's sort of the reverse of this movie. He plays a young boy in India who is separated from his brother in the 80s, gets lost, ends up on a train, ends up in a region of India where they speak a dialect he doesn't know, but he's still pretty clever, still pretty street smart, ends up adopted by an Australian couple, and years later sets out on a journey to try and find his mother, his brother, and his sister. And that journey doesn't completely go the way you might hope it would. And I just felt like that would be a really lyrical, mirror image kind of story to bookend with Philomena. I've only seen Lion the one time. I don't remember it super well, but I remember really liking it, and it's got really good reviews. Do you have a more recent sense of that film than I do?
I loved Lion. Lion was one of those the year it came out that anytime I was with family or friends and they're like, hey, is there a movie we should watch? I was like, Lion, let's put it on. It's so well done and it's so powerful and meaningful. And I think that's a great double feature.
I did sit for about an hour on Girl with the Dragon Tattoo just because it has a disgraced journalist who goes about investigating a new mystery, but that's the only connection, and that would be a jarring double feature.
It would be. It would be.
All right, so next week, I am not going to let anyone's emotions off the hook.
We need to start doing comedies at some point.
We do. I tried to do. What did I do? I did a light one a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
Adventureland, but it seemed like kind of hit and miss with the listeners and the viewers. But yes, I have State and Maine all loaded up for one of these weeks.
Oh, nice.
That's a laugh riot. But this week we're gonna watch Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always. This film wrecked me the first time I saw it. It's for free on Pluto and Peacock. You can rent it on other places. Topical trigger warnings. This movie is overtly about a teenager traveling from one state to another to have an abortion. And while I think the movie has plenty to say about that topic, it's interested in a lot more than just that, particularly this relationship between these two cousins that is a stronger bond than most people have with their siblings. Great performances by relatively unknown cast, and I haven't seen it in a couple years. My wife really wants to watch it, so we're going to watch it together as I prep for next week's episode. So again, Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always. You can watch it for free on Pluto or Peacock. It may still be on HBO, according to the chat. And yes, have some Kleenex nearby. And then I promise my next couple picks will be lighthearted. All right, let's do some questions.
Sure, let's do it.
Question.
I got something to say. I want the truth.
I am listening.
Aaron, what movie have you changed your mind about most over time?
This is a really interesting question. I think this question is easier for someone who is more of a repeat watcher, like you are, Jeremy. You love to watch things over and over and over again. I love to rewatch the things I love occasionally, or show them to other people. Basically, I rewatch when I can show it to, like, I can watch it with somebody else.
That makes sense.
But I am more of a, show me something new. I want to see a new story. Like, so I don't necessarily go back a lot. However, I remember coming out of Get Out, the Jordan Peele movie, and being like, oh, that was okay. That was good. That was kind of funny. And, I get what it's doing. And then the more I thought about it, and then I watched it again and again, it's a transcendent film. Like and I kind of liked it the first time I saw it, but I didn't think it was going to make my top 20 of the year, that kind of thing. And now it's in my top, 100 movies of all time. It's really, really good. So
I don't have any proof of this, but I have this theory that Jordan Peele lived with that story for years.
Sure.
And by the time he was ready to make it, he knew it inside and out. That is one of the most intentional movies I've ever seen. And it's so sure-handed for a first-time director. I just feel like he has to have been intimately familiar with every beat of that story.
And then the other direction would probably be Phantom Menace. I remember walking out of Phantom Menace just buzzing, just like that was so amazing. And I think actually Phantom Menace fits this question better than any other movie for me, because I went from loving it to hating it, realizing how little is going on in so much of that movie, how pointless so much of that stuff is. And then I've kind of come around back to kind of mid/liked it. I cannot get over how amazing Duel of the Fates is in that movie, and there is one of the reasons it's so good is the Qui-Gon Obi-Wan thing, which the movie sets up pretty well. So, I've come back to liking it after loving it and hating it. So, I've just been all over the map with Phantom Menace.
Well, Lucas is good at, especially with the prequels, is finishing on such a high note. You tend to forgive the bits that weren't great leading up to it. Like you said, with Duel of the Fates, that is such an iconic lightsaber duel. It goes on for so long. It has great locations. It's
the best music in the series.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just absolutely firing on all cylinders Star Wars. And he does the same thing similarly. The CG's not up quite there, but at the end of Attack of the Clones, you get, dozens of Jedi fighting at once, which we've never seen. Then you get Yoda flip fighting, which we've never seen. And you kind of walk out forgetting all the video game crap where Padme and Anakin were like almost turned into molten robot metal. I don't know what's going on and all that, except that I think he was hoping to sell a video game. But that's a good answer. I think I was probably initially disappointed and have slowly become more disappointed.
Fair.
But I love this question. So from good to bad, my answer is Pulp Fiction. Pulp Fiction came out right in my first couple years of exploring film and watching movies constantly. And it's such a sensory overload. And up until then, there had never been anything like that. Now we've got dozens of copycats, but that was such a unique voice, such a stylized way to tell a story, hilarious dialogue. I'll tell you what, I don't care for this movie anymore. I straight up don't enjoy it. The last time I watched it, I was like, this is, it's just,
yeah.
There's no soul in this movie. It's just, I don't know. I don't want to incite a riot, but I don't enjoy Pulp Fiction anymore when I watch it. That does not mean there's no technique or quality writing or good performances in there, but it doesn't do it for me anymore. Maybe the adrenaline shot scene, maybe, but that's it.
Yeah.
Like
it's clear. It's a few things are clear right off the bat with Tarantino. One thing that's clear is he understands how the aesthetics of a movie can impact your enjoyment of it. He understands how to use music better than almost any director I know of. Like his needle drops are legendary.
Yes.
And the same with some of the camera stuff he does and some of the cutting he does. He understands editing and how to use that to move. Where I've always missed Tarantino, and this includes Pulp Fiction, and the reason I've never really, I've kind of just been meh with Pulp Fiction to like meh minus. But the thing he doesn't seem to understand is what you talk about of heart. His movies for me don't speak to anything that I want to continue thinking about or processing after I leave the film. Up until recently, that has been the case with him, and I just wonder as he ages, if he's aging into some thematic.
Well, this is not my answer, but for a movie that I didn't like that I now appreciate, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is on that list, and I think that was just a case of so much hype and so much buzz by the time I got to it, which is after award season. That I was like, I don't see what the hype is about. And then 6 months later, I watched it again, and I was like, oh, I'm appreciating this. I don't know what happened. That's, probably he's just grown as a filmmaker. But my actual answer for a movie that I didn't like that I now enjoy is Ad Astra, which is a movie that you enjoyed right off the bat.
I love Ad
and
Astra.
saw more in the first viewing than I did. And I just had to get over the tonal shift of...
Sure.
I mean, there's a couple places, specifically the vampire space monkeys, just tonally, first time through, I couldn't appreciate what that was doing in the story. It just pulled me out of where I was. But I've seen that now, I think 3 or 4 times, probably 4 times. And I have come to quite appreciate that movie. So, yeah.
Good.
All right, next question. All right, what is the movie you had the greatest anticipation to see that completely lived up to your expectations?
I think the right answer for me for this is Titanic. And it's interesting to say because most people going into Titanic thought it was going to be a flop, but I was so pumped for that movie. This was a time when I was still watching trailers. The trailer blew me away. I couldn't wait to see what Cameron was going to do with it. And then it met all those expectations. I remember walking out of Titanic the first time just being like, well, he did it. Everybody can stop making movies now. We know how it works.
That is okay. James Cameron is a master at doing this, where he gives you such impressive visuals that you just put blinders on to the cookie cutter dialogue and characterization. Sure. You go back through Titanic today and you can still be wowed by the spectacle parts. It still holds up, but the dialogue and pretty much everything, I just lost his name, Billy Zane is doing in that movie is not working for me at all. But yeah, that's a good one. That movie, didn't that movie get pushed? Like, wasn't it supposed to release? I feel like the theater I worked at had a standee for Titanic in the summer, but then the movie came out in the winter. And that may have just been an early standee.
I mean, I know it came out in December and then basically owned everything through the beginning of the summer. Like, it was crazy how much it owned the box office.
So yeah, it was supposed to be out in July 2nd. But then in April, Cameron said, nah, not going to make it.
That's a Cameron staple right there, which I honestly respect. Like, if it ain't ready, don't put it out yet. Like, I think more movies could benefit from that.
I mean, video games is probably the one area they do this the most, because almost every major video game that launches these days has all kinds of bugs and issues. The other great answers.
The other one I would wanted to throw out was Paddington 2. Blew me away. Huge expectations for that.
Paddington 3 is screwed because of how good 2 was. That guy went on to make, what did he make? He's making the Chalamet Willy Wonka movie, the guy that directed Paddington 2. So it gives me hope. I don't really care about Willy Wonka anymore, but that guy did such magic with Paddington 2. Okay, good answers in the comments to this question about movies that completely lived up to expectations. I see Oppenheimer, Return of the King, Everything Everywhere All at Once, Independence Day, Fast and Furious, the first one. Actually, the first one is still pretty watchable, I think. Spider-Verse 2, Spider-Verse, Fellowship of the Ring, Avengers, Dark Knight, Dune. I haven't even answered this question yet. Why am I
have not given your answer yet?
Chat answers. Dark Knight is one of my answers. I love Batman Begins more than you could possibly know. And I had such a high bar for Dark Knight, and he cleared it, man. He broke the pole vault record with that movie for me. And then another one that was very similar is Mission Impossible Rogue Nation. I had seen Ghost Protocol in an IMAX theater because there were a couple scenes in there filmed with IMAX. Rogue Nation ramped that up. And that Opera House scene is still, I think, the best Mission Impossible action sequence. Granted, I haven't seen the most recent one. But yeah, that pretty much all the Mission Impossibles 4, 5, and 6 have just hit it out of the park for me. So. Got more Dark Knight, Everything Everywhere. Star Trek 2009. That's a good answer. All right, let's move on to another question. We got time for at least one more. What is a TV series you have kept watching over many seasons, even though it has clearly jumped the shark?
My answer is all of them.
You're a completionist then.
I am. I can only think of one TV series that I gave up on midway through. Now, I give myself the grace to give up in the first 3 episodes. If I don't like what's going on in the first 3 episodes, I'll go away. But after that, I stick around to the end. The only one I didn't was Walking Dead, and I just didn't like the way it was making me feel. Like, I just didn't like what it was doing to my psyche every time I watched that show. So I stopped watching.
I feel like The Walking Dead had a lot more interesting things to say about humanity in the first couple seasons, and then it just kind of became about cartoonish caricature type people and gruesome kills.
But the specific ones I will mention, Prison Break was great for 1 season, and then not great, and I watched it all the way through.
How many seasons did that show run?
Was it 3 or 4?
Something like that. That's the one where he tattooed the ape thing on his body.
Yeah, very specific concept that was resolved in the first season. That show would have been great in our current era of television, right? Like a little 10 episode,
start
thing
out to
on
make it a
streaming.
limited series,
right? Like Hijack. Like Hijack is one of those shows that just is nice. Of course, they'll make Hijack season 2 now. Watch. And then the other one's the X-Files. The X-Files jumped the shark after Scully left, and I watched all the way through Reyes and all that stuff. So
Who
yeah.
left?
Scully?
Scully left?
And both Mulder and Scully left eventually.
I had stopped watching by then.
So
What's weird is my answer to this question is none of them. Like
right, the opposite.
I am much more willing to just stop. The best example is Yellow Jackets. That first season was just riveting to me, and season 2 started strong, and around the 4th or 5th episode I was like, I am not enjoying this at all. And I'm not even trying to say the quality went down, although the reviews sort of bear that out, but I just stopped. It's like, I'm not even going to finish this season. I don't care who's going to eat who. I watched Friends pretty much all the way to the end, but it jumped the shark once they tried to have Rachel and Joey have a relationship, maybe even prior to that. They flirt with it in like season 8 or 9, and then they actually try to have a relationship in season 10, and it's just awkward and no good, and all Friends fans know exactly what I'm talking about. But I sure watched the whole thing, even after it was no longer funny. We've got Farscape in the comments, Supernatural, The Rookie. These are all shows I have not seen. Killing Eve.
Shaggy, you gave up on Marvelous Mrs. Maisel? That show's amazing.
That
show never jumped the shark. I don't understand. You can't say you bailed before it jumped the shark when it never jumped the shark.
He's just saying he bailed early on that one.
Okay. Right.
But that's life happens. All right, one more question, then we'll let everybody go to lunch. This is a question tailor-made for Aaron Dicer. What is the best film to take place in Michigan? It's a very specific question. Maybe they wrote it with you in mind.
It could be. They mentioned 8 Mile as the only one that they could really think of. The truth of the matter is, most of the answers are going to be Detroit. That's just where a lot of these take place. I thought of For the Love of the Game. Takes place at Tiger Stadium, and I really do enjoy that movie. I think the answer is Out of Sight. I think that's the best film to take place in Detroit is Out of Sight. Phenomenal movie. I also enjoy Gran Torino, the Clint Eastwood film. RoboCop certainly is very Detroit. One I wanted to mention, put on your radar, maybe on your watch list if you ever want to watch something really funny. Jeff Daniels did a movie called Escanaba in the Moonlight. And this is a movie that takes place in the UP, and it's very Yooper culture, which if you're a Michigander, you understand the difference between the mitten and the UP. And Daniels is a Michigan guy and actually never left Michigan. He lives in a small town in Michigan called Chelsea. He used to drive through Chelsea all the time. And he still lives there. He refused to actually move to L.A. Because he loves Michigan so much. So yeah, Jeff Daniels made a movie called Escanaba into Moonlight that's really fun if you want to check something that's very Michigan.
It's weird. I thought for sure you were going to say Gross Point Blank.
No, I mean, that is a Michigan movie, but I haven't watched it recently enough to love it. I remember thinking it was interesting, but my movie eyes were different when I watched that movie many years ago. So
I think it's actually waned a little bit for me. I really liked it, and I think I now just kind of like it or like it.
Yeah.
I had to Google, to be honest, outside of 8 Mile and RoboCop, but apparently It Follows takes place in Michigan.
I think It Follows it doesn't take place anywhere or at any time.
But it was shot in Michigan then? Is that the deal?
I think it may have been shot in Michigan, but like that movie is very metaphorical. Like it feels like it's in the 80s, but they have like a cell phone type device in it that isn't really that movie is out of like the real world in my opinion, but yeah.
Well, yeah.